All right, so move on to the next segment. We're going to pivot over here to the world of MMA inside the UFC world, and I'll be sharing my 5 biggest UFC upset victories in the UFC history. So, in no particular order, these are my 5 biggest upset wins in UFC history. We'll start off with George St. Pierre fighting Matt Serra back in 2007, their first fight that took place back in 2007. So, back in 2007, I think Matt Serra's big victory against George St. Pierre was one of the biggest upsets in UFC history because at the time, George St. Pierre, it was viewed as one of the greatest welterweights of all time. In my opinion, he is the best welterweight of all time in UFC history. And at the time, in 2007, he was unstoppable. On top of the mountain as the welterweight champion, an unstoppable run, a pound for pound force. And Matt Serra was a 7-1 underdog heading into that championship fight against George St. Pierre back in 2007. And when you look back at it, the fight only lasted one round. One round. That right hook that Matt Serra landed on George St. Pierre in the first round of that championship fight wobbled the champion, and he stayed on him. Matt Serra didn't just let the moment slide. He stayed on George St. Pierre, landing several power shots, and George St. Pierre wasn't the same. He couldn't recover well. And the heavy hands that Matt Serra kept landing on George St. Pierre over and over and over again with the power shots was just too much for George St. Pierre to continue the fight. And the referee stepped in. It was a knockout victory for Matt Serra that landed one of the biggest upsets in UFC history. And this is back in 2007. So we're nearly in the 20-year anniversary of that. And I still think that stands the test of time as one of the biggest upsets in UFC history. Definitely the biggest upset in welterweight, one of the biggest upsets in welterweight history. I'll talk about another one, but tremendous performance by Matt Serra the first time when he fought George St. Pierre, taking the welterweight championship from him back in 2007. Next fight, we'll go with something that happened in the modern era, basically 2 years ago. Sean Strickland defeating Israel Adesanya back in 2023. Now, this was a huge upset 2 years ago, back in 2023, where Sean Strickland defeated Israel Adesanya to become the new middleweight champion. Because at the time, Israel Adesanya still is viewed as one of the best middleweight champions of all time. I view him as the second best middleweight champion of all time behind the great Anderson Silva. But Israel Adesanya was one of the most dominant middleweight champions of all time, and he just won the title back a few months ago at the time, back in April, when he knocked out Alex Pereira, finally got past his kryptonite in combat sports. But you look back at that back in September 2023, Sean Strickland was a plus 470 underdog heading into that fight against Israel Adesanya. And Sean Strickland shut him out. I still believe that fight was a 5-0 shutout in favor of Sean Strickland when he won that fight by unanimous decision. The elite striking, the good defensive performance against Israel Adesanya, scored the huge knockdown in the first round. And I think if there was at least 15 more seconds left in the first round, he would have knocked out Israel Adesanya, and that would have even been a bigger shocker with someone like Sean Strickland on paper that had no chance to victory against Israel Adesanya. And I still remember when I covered that on the Combat Series 2 years ago. I said there was no clear path for Sean Strickland to defeat Israel Adesanya. I thought the fight would be over within 1 to 2 rounds with Israel Adesanya wiping his hands clean and knocking out Sean Strickland. Well, that was not the case. And Sean Strickland outlanded one of the best strikers that the UFC ever seen at this middleweight division. 137 punches to 94 punches. So it was crazy. And on paper, again, this was supposed to be one-sided. Israel had the better footwork, more power, a better fundamental fighter. Strickland just had no path to victory. But, hey, that's what we get. That's why the sport of MMA is so unpredictable, because any given time when you step in the octagon, a big upset can happen. And it happened back in 2023. Let's go to the women's side, where we've seen Holly Holm defeat Ronda Rousey back in 2015. Now, this was one of the biggest upsets in women's UFC history. And Ronda Rousey at the time, she was undefeated, the undisputed bantamweight champion in the women's division at the time in the UFC. She was so dominant, undefeated. I think she was 11-0 or 12-0 at the time. And Holly Holm was a former boxing world champion. She was not known in her MMA career, but she was known for being a world champion over in boxing. And Then she went to the octagon and defeated one of the greatest of all time in Ronda Rousey in dominating fashion. So back in 2015, Holly Holm in the first round just dictated the whole entire 5 minutes of that fight 10 years ago with her boxing experience and the footwork to control control the fight in the distance, hitting Ronda Rousey with several punches and leg kicks. And Ronda Rousey was just confused. She was frustrated as the fight went on. And then in the second round, Holly Holm took advantage of the fact that Ronda Rousey was completely frustrated off her A game, and she was trying to clinch, but then Holly Holm took advantage of that and caught Ronda Rousey with a huge left leg kick to the jaw, and that was all she wrote because Ronda Rousey was knocked out, and Holly Holm turned the whole UFC upside down, becoming a bantamweight champion, scoring one of the biggest upsets in women's UFC history that night 10 years ago. And that was basically the downfall of Ronda Rousey because she came back and fought Amanda Nunes. Everybody knows how that fight went. And that was the end of her MMA career. Then she transitioned to the WWE, and here we are today. But that was a crazy sequence back 10 years ago in 2015. Next upset, we got two more to go. Next upset, I'll go with Leon Edwards defeating Kamaru Usman back in 2022. Now, in their second fight back in 2022, this was a huge upset when Leon Edwards defeated Kamaru Usman. And Kamaru Usman at the time was riding a 15-fight winning streak and was one of the most dominant welterweight champions of all time. Again, that goes to my point. I think Kamaru Usman is the second best welterweight champion of all time behind George St. Pierre, and he was so dominant in his run back in 2022. So everyone thought he would just steamroll Leon Edwards, and he was steamrolling Leon Edwards because he was up 4-0 heading into the final round. It was a 4-0 shutout at the time in favor of Kamaru Usman. He was in complete control in the final round, was winning the final round, and even in the final 60 seconds, he was still controlling the pace of the fight, landing the power shots and the leg shots to make Leon Edwards feel uncomfortable. But Leon Edwards knew he needed a lucky Hail Mary shot. His corner told him, stop feeling sorry for yourself. You're still in this fight. You got 5 minutes to go. We need the knockout victory. And by the MMA gods, he was graced by the MMA gods that night, scored the Hail Mary KO shot with under 45 seconds to go to win the welterweight championship. Kamaru Usman was up huge on the judges' scorecards, and for some reason, Kamaru Usman was still engaging in the fight. Now, I give him credit for giving the fans what they want to see, but MMA IQ, you know you're up. Take the final 60 seconds off. Just coast to victory so you don't get into harm's way. Well, he landed up in harm's way, still trying to fight in the inside, fight in the pocket, and Leon Edwards connected with that huge calf kick to the head and knocked out Kamaru Usman. Everybody was in shock that Leon Edwards pulled off one of the biggest upsets in welterweight history and became the welterweight champion. That just goes to show in combat sports, you're never truly out of a fight until the final bell or the final whistle blows. And Leon Edwards proved it 3 years ago. And the welterweight division has not been the same since, in my opinion. We've seen some transitional champions. I mean, Leon Edwards was a champion for a little bit, then Bilal Muhammad was a champion, then Jack Della was the champion. Now Israel Makhachev is the champion now. So we've seen a lot of different things, but it all opened the door at welterweight when we saw this upset back in 2022. Final upset that I'll cover in this segment: Juliana Pena defeating Amanda Nunes in their first fight back in 2021. Now, this was a big upset back in 2021 because Amanda Nunes was riding a wave of momentum. She was a double champion, first ever double champion in UFC women's history, still the only woman to ever do that. And she was on a dominant run, establishing herself as the greatest women's UFC fighter of all time. Amanda Nunes was a huge 6-5 or Juliana Pena was a huge 6.5 underdog heading into this championship fight against Amanda Nunes. But in the first round of the first fight that they had, Amanda Nunes was in complete control. It looked like she was in complete control. She scored the knockdown, scoring the knockdown, punching, landing punches and power shots on Juliana Pena, making Juliana Pena feel uncomfortable, landing some calf kicks on the power shots, and she was dominant on the ground. She shot for a few submissions to wear down Juliana Pena. She gained control time on the ground in the first round. But after that first round, the second round is when the fight took an unexpected turn. And for like 1 to 2 minutes, Juliana Pena and Amanda Nunes were just going back and forth, laying haymakers and bombs on each other. And I think that was one of the best sequences that I've ever seen in women's combat sports history. I mean, I could go with the sequences of some great fights that Amanda Nunes, that Katie Taylor and Amanda Serrano had in boxing. But when Amanda Nunes and Juliana Pena were going back and forth for 1 to 2 minutes, just landing bombs, both women landing huge power shots, both women bleeding from the nose, breathing heavily from the mouth. It was just a great sequence. But then it was the champion, Amanda Nunes, that got tired and fatigued trying to land the power shots over and over on Juliana Pena. She took advantage of that and started to land more power shots on Amanda Nunes. And then she finally landed the takedown to take the champion to the ground. And an unexpected bulldog choke that made Amanda Nunes quickly submit on the ground because she was tired and fatigued to help Juliana Pena score one of the biggest upsets in UFC history. And the fact that not only did Juliana Pena win the fight, it's the fact that she made one of the greatest grapplers in UFC history forced to submit within seconds. Like, I'm talking 3 to 10 seconds while the submission was on, and she was forced to tap. But we know the history would happen in the second fight. But man, I think that's a picture-perfect list, guys, of some of the biggest upsets that's ever happened in UFC history. Those are my 5 biggest upsets that's ever happened in UFC history.